I want to talk about the importance of your demeanor during your family court case, your child custody, any type of legal proceeding that you have where you have a trier of fact who is going to be listening to what you're saying, reviewing your evidence, and otherwise making a decision that is going to impact your life, whether that be a jury or whether that be a judge. But importantly, it's really, really important that you make sure that you pay attention to your conduct and your demeanor during your hearing. And I know a lot of times people may not realize how important that is, but for example, I watched a hearing today, right? And the facts of the case were essentially that there was a mom and a dad who were in court for custody and visitation issues. And dad was making the argument that mother was not showing up for visitation. He had several police reports that he presented to the court. He had phone calls, records of the phone calls that he had attempted to make, and the other parent was not answering the phone, things of that nature, right? And the mother then began making a bunch of excuses for the reasons why she wasn't showing up for visits. She did not deny that she wasn't showing up, but her main excuse was, oh, well, I sent him a text or I sent him a phone call, or I told so and so that we weren't going to show up for the visits. And during the hearing, the father was explaining how the lack of communication not only was disruptive for his relationship with the child, but it also caused issues with his scheduling because he had planned, specifically, I believe, to visit his father who was older and maybe ill or something like that. He had planned to visit his father out of town during the times that he wasn't going to have his daughter in his custody. And so he was talking about the fact that if she would have just communicated that she wasn't going to show up, he not only would have, missed out on the time with his child, but he at least would have been able to go and spend his time with his father. Completely understandable, right? Anyways, so there was some back and forth and they're going back and forth. But one thing that caught my eye was the fact that both parents were very frustrated with each other and were expressing their frustration. Mother's frustration was revealed as tears, right? Like that is how she was venting her frustration. She was crying. She was very emotional. That's how she was, displaying her frustration. Father, who saw the tears, is immediately after he saw the tears, his eyes were rolling. He got angry. He started calling her a liar. He was saying that, it was all a facade or it was fake and those tears weren't real and she just wasn't showing up and she was interfering with the relationship with him and his child. And he was also very emotional, but his emotions came out differently, right? You know how we all express emotions differently. And so one thing that stood out to me about this whole scenario was the fact that although they both were frustrated, and although for me as the attorney that was just kind of sitting and watching this case that was happening in the courtroom, for me it was clear that mother was definitely not showing up for the visitation as she was supposed to per the court orders, right? Regardless of her reason. The real issue was there was an order in place and she wasn't following it. However, because of all of the emotions that were happening and because of the way that father's frustration was presenting compared to mother's tears, right? It somehow caused the court to deflect the issues. And the issue no longer became, why is mother not following these rules and the court's orders? And what are we going to do about it? To, father is very angry and frustrated, and you need to stop interrupting and calm down and don't speak to her this way and don't yell this way, because I'm sure that if this is the way that you're acting in the courtroom, then it's even worse when you're outside of the courtroom. And for me, as someone who obviously has to navigate these issues as a family law attorney on a regular basis, father's inability to be mindful of his demeanor in the courtroom, unfortunately, is what led to circumstances that probably would have been different had he just kept his cool. And I don't agree with it. I don't think that that was the right route to go. I don't think that the judge should have been on him the way that they were, considering, the totality of the circumstances and after listening to the facts of the case. However, the reality is that we are all human beings, including the judge, right? And so immediately when the court saw the mom crying, there was empathy, right? Because it's a woman and she's in tears and she's talking about her frustrations and all of these things. Had father been crying instead of angry and frustrated, maybe that may have swayed the court a little bit too, right? And so my main point is that when you are dealing with a family court case and you're in front of somebody who you don't know how they're going to react and you don't know what their triggers are, or what's going to cause them to sway in one direction or the other, it's really, really important that you keep your cool. Now, he didn't have a lawyer. She did have a lawyer. I could see her lawyer kind of tap her arm during the hearing when she needed to tone it down a little bit. Her lawyer would let her vent a little bit to get some of it out, which is tactics that are employed on a regular basis in a family court proceeding, right? Like if there is a situation where I know my client is in the middle of tears and that I feel that those tears will pull at the heartstrings of the judge, I'm going to let him roll with it. I'm going to let her roll with those tears, right? And so emotions are real things that impact people every day, even in the court system, but you got to be careful. You got to be mindful of your emotions and how you're allowing them to come out, and you have to be able to manage them if you're not able to present them in a way that can be well received by one party that is going to be making the decision for your case. And no, that is not fair. You should be able to vent out your frustrations and have authentic emotions to a certain extent, right? Like if you got anger issues and you just out of control, that's a whole different conversation. But I'm just talking about this father was not disrespectful per se. He wasn't out of control. He just was, human. He was eye rolling and why is she lying? And all of the natural emotions that people feel when they're dealing with a family law case. But in this particular instance, I think that had he controlled it a little bit more, things would have went differently. So just something to keep in mind. Let me know what you think in the comments, if this is something that you've experienced, how you've dealt with it, if this is, a strategy that you use in your family court case, and if this perspective was helpful, because, sometimes you don't really realize how you can unintentionally hurt your own case just by being a human being. So let me know in the comments.